Daniel Howat from Next Best Picture. Daniel and Ed, thanks so much for your time. I loved the movie, was blown away by this family's journey and their story, and so I'm excited to hear more about the making of the movie. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniel. Excited to be here.
Daniel, big fan of the YouTube channel.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it. So, Blink follows this family on their journey across the globe. What are the origins of this journey becoming a film? How did you both arrive at the project?
Well, we had our friends at MRC send us the story, and I took one look at it, and I said, this would be an amazing documentary. You know, so often documentaries are sort of challenging and, as I know well, political and things like this. But here we had a story that was about a family that was sort of like intimate and beautiful whilst not shying away from some very, very heavy themes. So I understood immediately that this would be an amazing film. I asked MRC if I could make it with my best friend, Ed. They were very enthusiastic about that. And so I called Ed and I asked him if he wanted to make this movie.
And I jumped at the chance to make it when you're called by, Daniel and said, do you want to travel the world with this family and tell this incredible story? It's not really difficult to answer that question. And I think what I'd add to that is we were very lucky that we got to make this with the same film family that made Navalny. So we were working with Mel Miller and Diane Becker at Fishbowl Films. So it felt like a family picture from the beginning of the process.
And obviously, the family had this bucket list and this whole, idea of what they wanted to accomplish in terms of filling their families, minds with all these stunning images. Mm-hmm. But I've heard Edith say that the family sort of left on the journey without a real itinerary. But of course, films require a lot more planning than that. So what was the process to actually produce the film, making sure locations were secured, accommodations, to make sure the film could actually happen?
I would say, Daniel, that this was, in a sense, documentary filmmaking 101, because we were thrown into situations where you had to be making all of those logistical decisions that you just said at the very, very, very last minute. So from behind the scenes, I can say that our producers were, having to. It was an incredibly hard job for a producer to do. For us, we get dropped into these situations. We follow the family and we make best of the situation day by day as directors. And that's very much part of the job description. And I think the same is true for producers, but this was just a particularly exaggerated form of that, where it's like, drop everything and do this immediately. And luckily we had the team to do that.
That's amazing. And how much of their journey was actually captured by your crew? We don't see every stop along the way. And there's also, plenty of iPhone footage interspersed with stuff you actually shot. So how much of the journey was actually captured by you and your team?
I mean, that's in the film. I want to say 90%. Almost all of the film is us. There's obviously the cable car scene, which is principally Edith's footage, and we have little interspersed, very intimate family moments that are put between our scenes. But it's 90% us.
And we don't see every stop of the journey. Was there decision-making process to film or not film some of those locations that they traveled to, or was that simply an editing decision on the back end?
Very much a production decision, given how much the logistics, the time cost and the literal money cost involved. We realized very early on that this was a film that needed to go beyond travel logs. So we tried firstly to find the emotional core, which for us was a balance between the kind of wondrous journey of the kids and the kind of anticipatory grief that the parents were feeling as they came to terms very early on with the condition of retinitis pigmentosa. So as we understood those broad character journeys, we then tried to find places on their itinerary as they came up that could serve as a kind of mise en scène backdrop for that larger emotional narrative. So, you've got the spiritual backdrop of the Egyptian desert. You have the more psychic atmosphere in the Amazon. You have the very literal visual metaphor of climbing a mountain in Nepal. So these were, within reason, conscious decisions we made, given the limitations placed upon us as documentary filmmakers.
Yeah, I love hearing about the way that you match the locations to the thematic, to the themes that you were trying to capture in the film. Obviously, film requires so much planning and thinking through those themes. But what were the ways that this surprised you along the way? What were the circumstances where you just didn't see this coming as you were filming or even editing?
Well, that's every single day of production, Daniel. I mean, it's Hitchcock's quote that in documentary, God is the director, and it's very true. This is a film of little tiny moments, a sort of mosaic of little family moments, almost as if you took little snapshots and was able to weave it into this tapestry that told this bigger story. That's sort of how we framed it. And so anytime we captured some magical little tidbit, that's a good day. And it happened a lot.
Yeah, I would add to that the kids are probably the clearest living articulation of the narrative illogic, both in the way that they, in a parent's everyday life, throw a family story off course. And I think that becomes equally true in the course of our movie. And there are countless times, which Daniel intimates, where the kids would just say something, and I think on a very personal level, it would catch me off guard. I think of the interview we did with Colin under the stairs when he's asked, how does he feel about the future? Is he scared of the future, living with the condition? And his answer is to say, well, no, I'll have a guide cat. And I remember being in, all of us in that interview space. We're in this tiny little grotto underneath it's the actual kids' grotto where they play. And it's this tiny space, and there's 4 or 5 crew members in there. Edith is in there, and we're all sweating and trying to make sure we don't get in the way of the shot. And I remember just being so emotionally caught off guard by that moment. And every crew member in the room was essentially crying as we were filming. And it was moments like that where the kids just cut through all your expectations that as a person, not as a filmmaker living in the world, they stick with me.
Yeah, those moments are beautiful. Especially as a dad of 2 young kids, I loved seeing the moments where they surprised us in that way, and also the meltdowns that are so real. That was beautiful. Was it challenging to get the family, especially the kids, comfortable on camera? Was there any process that you guys got to know them to get them comfortable, or was this just them from the start?
It sounds ridiculous, but I think, Daniel, you'd agree with me. This is how the kids are. I mean, Daniel, you tell that great story of the first time you met them and them clambering all over you as they
I was warned, Daniel, that they like to fight. And I didn't know what that meant. And then Ed was like, they're going to beat you up. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, because hadn't have at the time a lot of experience with young children. And as soon as I met them, it was 3 little ruffians like lunging on me and pulling me to the ground. And Mia looking sort of like eye
rolling.
Yeah, eye rolling. And they just started fighting me. There's no other way to put it. Like, they were punching and kicking me. And it was like in equal parts hilarious and kind of scary.
Yeah. And I mean, this is very much how they are. And I think I want to just put a particular shout out to our incredible director of photography, Jean-Sébastien Francard, who is Québécois and who is incredibly gifted with kids. And so very quickly, he and I spent a lot of time making sure we got into the kids' world. That meant on a practical, technological level, keeping the camera very low, because Daniel and I always wanted to tell a story that could capture a kid's experience and that kids could enjoy. But I think he became Uncle JS within 3 or 4 days. Making a film with us ended up feeling like just getting to see Uncle JS and Uncle Ed and go on an adventure. And I think we did well in how we framed it with the kids. And also we just had a DP whose wonderful personality allowed that intimacy and naturalness from the kids.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the visual style of the film as well. That so much about this film is about imagery. It's about filling these kids' minds with images that they might not get to see when they're older. As you thought about the visual style, what did you want the film to look like? I hear you wanted the low framing from the kids' point of view. What else did you think through about the visual style?
A reference point for me very early was to turn to fiction films. I found that I was not finding the right references that we'd like in the documentary space for whatever reason. And so I remember finding Terrence Malick's Tree of Life and finding that there was a kind of quiet everyday poetry maybe went a bit further than we wanted to in our film. But I think there was something about that I really appreciated in the way the kids were filmed. And there was something about more observational, like art house documentaries, and I'm losing a particular example that I can think of right now. But one thing we keep coming back to and that excited us was the everydayness of some of the experiences in the film. I think of that scene we have near the end where with the camera's very low and we're following Laurent on his first day of school. I think this is not a question of how we shot, but as much as what we focused on. We wanted to really capture these incredibly tiny moments that end up containing the kernel of a great deal about a whole family's way of connecting to the world. And it's in those moments where you say goodbye to your daughter as she goes off for her first big party, or when you say goodbye to your son who goes to his first day at school, that you see a real emotional rawness in the story. And so that was really something we wanted to focus on.
Yeah, and I've heard y'all mention elsewhere that this wasn't just a rich family going on an extended holiday. That's not what this was. Speaking to the everydayness that you just mentioned, I've heard you describe the family as middle class. How did that create interesting limitations or opportunities as you captured this family's journey across the globe?
Yeah, well, you'll notice in the movie they're not going to Paris. They're not going to Berlin. They're not going to London. They're going to places that they could afford to go to, which often are places that are less accessible to travelers, especially travelers with 4 young children. And what that did was created, some amazing opportunities for the children to experience cultures way beyond anything they'd ever experienced before.
And Daniel, you mentioned earlier that at the start of the film you didn't have experience with little kids, but I know since you've had a young one of your own. What was it like working on this film at the same time as experiencing fatherhood?
Well, it was amazingly serendipitous, Daniel, that I would be working on a film about a family as I was starting my own family. And for me, I had sort of like this masterclass in parenting via the dailies I was watching every day. And I understood sort of like the cornerstone virtue of both sort of like the theme of the movie and Edith and Seb's parenting model, is that you have to make it clear to your children how important resilience is. That's like the cornerstone value. If you are not a resilient person, then this beautiful, wonderful world we live in, which can also be very dark and scary, will eat you alive. And that's something that I think about a lot as it relates to my own upbringing and also to the upbringing of my son.
Well, the journey itself is incredible. It was phenomenal to watch, and incredible to watch this family grow and come into their own as they are approaching this maybe frightening future. What was it like watching the film with the family for the first time? What was their experience of watching it and their reaction?
I mean, I can give you both sides of that, Daniel. The typical kid logic, as Daniel and I like to call it, irreverent side, was that we're sitting at this auditorium at Telluride, and there's this moment in the film, I'm not spoiling much for the audience, where our father slips over, and it's quite a dramatic thud as he hits the ground. And everyone in the audience gasps in shock and in mild horror, except for the 4 children sitting next to me who burst into hysterical laughter as they watch their dad completely wipe out. And the film was full of these moments where the kids particularly, were seeing a whole different world unfold before our eyes. And it was kind of eye-opening to me to sit next to little Laurent, who's looking at the screen with rapt attention, but clearly building a whole different story of what happened as he watched it. And I really love that. And after the film, he came up to me and would tell me all the little things that he saw that we didn't include and this and that. But the more serious, emotional kind of element that took all of us off guard is that Leo, the oldest boy who doesn't live with the condition, he came up to me and JS, the cinematographer, after the film and said that for the first time, or one of the first times, he felt that he understood in an emotional way his sibling's condition. And that was, it was a lot to hear, but he said it with a kind of a joy and a happiness that he'd had that opportunity. And I think hearing that from Leo really cut my heart in two.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, guys, I really love the film, especially as a parent. I think it's an incredible watch for parents. It's really impactful. So thank you for that. Before I let you go, Daniel, I wanted to ask you. Last month, it was announced you're in pre-production on Tuner, your feature narrative debut.
Yeah.
How has documentary filmmaking like Navalny and Blink prepared you for a fiction feature?
Well, I think documentary filmmaking is all about going with the flow, right? It's like, the world around you is often dictating events, and you just have to be agile and fast and problem solve as you go. And I think that if you can just take that skill set and apply it to the context of a fiction film, it suits you well. The agility to problem solve and the sort of 4D chessness of seeing problems before they arise. So far in this process has been very, very helpful and additive as we've set off on this Tuner journey.
Have you started shooting yet, or still in pre-production?
We start on Wednesday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank
Well,
you.
best of luck on that, and best of luck with Blink. Can't wait for more people to see it. Appreciate
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Yeah,
Thank you,
appreciate your time.
Daniel.